Thank you. Yeah, really enjoyed all these talks. So thanks everyone. And starting, I guess, with Tracy's talk at the beginning, I just really appreciated how you were trying to translate your findings into actionable information and attempting at least to work with the Army Corps. And I have questions about that, but I don't know if I want to open up that can of worms. And then also thinking about the model that Alex, you guys are working on, is there, I'm sure you all are talking, but is there potential to use that really detailed numerical model to simulate alternative management strategies and help guide decision making with the coastal master plan?
Yeah, in terms of, I think that's something the state is doing. Ours is more for research, but I mean, it could be used for that. But I wouldn't say that our model is necessarily better than the state's. Yeah.
I'm next. I'm in the models and also in the presentations regarding mangrove ecosystems. I did not see any mention of the macrofaunal component, at least that I've seen, like along the coast of French Guiana, which is absolutely critical to the rate of growth and recolonization of the mangroves. And so in the models, there weren't any parameters associated with bioturbation, for instance. And in the description of the ecosystems, I didn't see that. Is that included, or is that not important worldwide? Is that just locally important?
Can I give it to David? Well, like, so if you look at soil cores, right, the long-term accumulation rates, then it should all be there. It should all be embedded into what that soil column look like, which is a X-ray of like what happened, right? So all the crabs, all the macrofauna, the worms and stuff that, wants to live there, process that organic matter. And so it should be captured into your net surface elevation change. Is like part of what's happening. From a keystone or engineered species, crabs, especially like that kind of macrofauna, right? Because I think macrofauna is anything that you can barely see to, right? Yeah. So crabs are like extremely important in cycling that carbon. And one of the things that that I participated with this crazy group of people in Brazil when I started 20 years ago, they had like nylon cords wrapped around the leaves, and they had green leaves and more or less green, yellow, and yellow leaves. And we would just distribute them within certain quadrants, and we would watch for like the whole day the removal rate by crabs. That never got published. I wasn't in charge. I was just an undergrad student. I was just helping to tie the knots. But we were in counting, how many and what type of leaves and how the rates and all that. And it's amazing. Like all the leaves that you put down there, they're gone, right? So it's incredible. The carbon cycling, job that they play in the system. And I also want to mention really quick, like in many countries, I think all the way to Guyana, I haven't been to the French Guiana, I've been to the other one. And in Brazil, it's amazing. They're actually endangered species right now, the bigger crabs, because they're delicious, right? So you go out and they boil them kind of like the crawfish that we have here. And they give you a little tiny like wooden board with a little wooden, like look like those like judges hammers, and you're just cracking and opening, and it's a delicacy. But that's why they're endangered, because they take truckloads out of those mangroves. So therefore you're undermining the system, taking some of that part of the carbon pump out like on a daily basis, right? And it's not done so much as used to be back in the day, like manually catching with your arm going into the gallery and for subsistence. It's more like using mini bombs and hooks and traps and stuff that cause a tremendous impact, not only in the fisheries, but also leaving behind a lot of like plastic debris. But I'm sure David wants to talk more about that. You talked about mangroves, keep going.
So what you just emphasized the carbon part of it, which obviously is extremely important. But I was also concerned with the modification of the environment by the crabs that promotes mangrove growth. So for the fact that they burrow into the sediment counteracts transpiration and the very high salinities you typically get in the subsurface rhizosphere zones, and also it minimizes sulfide buildup. That's I think the incorporation of the whole macrofaunal component, UCA and so forth, is really critical to modeling the restoration of mangroves and the growth rate of them. At least I would think it is.
I fully agree.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'll add is, I mean, the spatial distribution of that is so heterogeneous, like, because you know, you go, if you're in the fringe, right, where you're getting much more of the tidal fluctuations, that's, I mean, at least in my experience, where we've seen a lot more of the burrows actually happening. And once you start getting away from that tidal prism, those areas that are more in sort of the basin part of the forest, those critters go away, right? So you kind of lose even that. So it you know, in some sense, what we've seen, at least in parts of the Philippines and in Florida, yes, they're definitely helping sort of aerate the soils and reduce salinity. But they're not really in those areas where I think you do see a lot of that high buildup in the basin forest itself, at least with my experience with the critter.
Thanks.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the salt marsh restoration part, and the fact that the plan is to use like dredge disposals somewhere, and this dredging, especially from the river, but could be also from the very near sediment, is generally pretty polluted, like got a lot of contaminants in there. So I don't know if that has any relation with the fact that it doesn't grow as fast as it should, or it doesn't store as much carbon as it should. But this probably also a matter of taking contaminants from the river, from the coastal zone, and reputting or these contaminants in the water and in the salt marsh for the rest of the ecosystem too. So what do you think?
That certainly can be, and I actually haven't looked up to see the contaminant levels in some of these marsh creation projects. I can tell you that the plant productivity is quite high. So the sort of question is, why aren't we accumulating the carbon in the soil? And you know, wetland plants can be you know, pretty sort of robust to pollutants and can take up pollutants in their biomass. But yeah, certainly, you know, the composition of the soil that's being dredged and placed may have an effect on the system. Sure.
Can I follow up on that?
Sure.
So dredging produces a lot of CO2, and we also saw from your talk amount of carbon we accumulate. Has anybody done a kind of analysis to see how many years it will take just to offset the dredging that took place in the first place?
Yes, people have looked into that, but I don't know.
Like an order of decade, 2 decades? What's the average? Okay. More questions? Oh, go for it first.
Great talks. I have one little comment, if I can, from for the previous question of modeling macrofaunas. I happen to have the same idea for salt marshes, and a couple professors at Boston University actually had a data set or paper on crab grazing behaviors on salt marshes in the Carolinas, and they actually form paths and create creeks. So I think part of the question to modeling that is also behavior modeling. So how did they make decisions on where to grave, and you know, their preferences on soil and vegetation types. For my question, I have two for Tracy. You mentioned that part of the restoration projects are where marshes are starved. One of the reasons is because the dikes were built around them, and then later on you open it. Do you know the height of the dikes? Are they emerged all the time or at mean sea level? And do you think that's a correlation to how much sediment is loaded every tide? And the second question is, you mentioned that in environments where you have more mineral sediments, you have more actually carbon accumulation. Do you think it's related to more mineral deposition that bump the elevation of the marsh, therefore you have more primary production, or is linked to the fact that more burial is happening when there's more mineral sediments?
Okay, so first question. So usually those containment dikes are about 4 feet above the marsh surface in the middle. There's also sort of a moat that occurs around these created marshes. So it doesn't go from this like high elevation levee directly to the marsh. So there's some interesting things. Even if you gap those levees, you have the potential for trapping to occur in the surrounding moat. And so only on, in areas where you have, flooding to the point to where that the entire marsh surface is flooded, the opportunities for sediments to deposit. And then your second question, yes, I think it's burial, but I also think there is this potential for mineral interactions with carbon that sort of protect the carbon from decomposition from microbes. So the mineral sediment plays multiple roles in preserving and accumulating carbon.
So you would say the primary production between all these sites are probably similar despite the different level of mineral sediment?
No, I think also mineral sediments increase the primary production through multiple, through bringing mineral nutrients and also increasing the elevation. Depends on the baseline elevation of the marsh, but sure. Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I really enjoyed that, and I'm intrigued by these questions of what the limits of our models will be, including crab behavior potentially in the future. My question is also for Tracy. I've worked mostly in San Francisco Bay, where there's a collapse of the oyster population when it was essentially settled in the 1800s. And I'm curious, the name of one of your sites is Cheniere Plain, and I'm curious if you can speak to maybe relationships between oyster populations or other shellfish there that work also. Are they adding other sediment sources? Are they related to marsh morphodynamics in this system?
Thank you for your question. Okay, so oysters. Okay. I can tell you anecdotally, having done my graduate work out in the Cheniere Plain, that historically there were quite a lot of oysters, eastern oyster beds, and now they've essentially been depleted. But that's sort of just a story. It's called the Cheniere Plain because there are these high elevation Cheniere ridges that occur parallel to the coast, and that create sort of a different geology of that region as compared to the Mississippi Deltaic Plain. And so it sort of semi-impounds those marshes. As far as oysters and the role there, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I can go. So one of the problems when you talk about, calculating this global blue carbon budgets, you see a lot of the papers they put together, salt marshes and mangroves. Here are the differences, right? Earth system models don't represent either. There are, specific models that try to simulate one or the other, moving from this local, regional scale at best models to how would we go about adding that on an Earth system thinking? What are some commonalities that are found between salt marshes and mangroves that we could use to start thinking that direction?
Okay. So I think is that working? Yeah. I think was March or April last year, the DOE organized a 50 people workshop in Rockville to talk about that. So they brought a bunch of ecologists to the room to talk to a bunch of Earth systems models, ecologists, right? And that's exactly what we heard in how to integrate. So you have to draw some generalities. And when you look, it's a model, right? So it's a simplification of the reality. It should be, because it's a model. So you could probably like pull numbers together for like stocks and sequestration rates, and maybe not so much of the outgassing part and the lateral exchange. But it's better than not having, right? And at least you have those like cells in the coastline that at least are capturing those fluxes, whether they're CO2, methane, or nitrous oxide, that now those models don't consider that. So there's a report that should be coming out at any time soon. I think it's the internal review right now. And one of the executive summary, it's already out. And I forgot what the title is, but it's something about like addressing challenges and gaps in Earth system models, with this wetland issue that's not represented in them yet. But there's a report coming out, and I haven't seen the final format of the report, but there should be like a roadmap, if you will, in there that came out of the workshops. I can't wait to see what the final product looks like. Each one of us like formed groups like we're going to be doing here, and each one of us wrote their own chapters. And because we're all busy with other things, I didn't read other people's chapters. but that was the main intent. So I think that's going to probably like bump it, forward a little bit on how, like, what exactly we have to do to have those fluxes incorporated into those Earth system models. Probably didn't respond to your question, but
So what did your chapter?
my chapter was like an overview of what kinds, what we would consider like an ecosystem that's tidally influenced across the southeastern U.S. So we went all the way from tidal flats to the coastlands and things that could be drowned by sea level rise at some point. So that was my chapter. And then what are the driving forces that will control like change over time, right? And then some people that work at the DOE PNNL were funded at the PNNL by the DOE to do that kind of research. They were there, and they were the one, right? They do the Earth system models. Ben Solman, I think it's one of them, and then there's a couple other, I forgot the name, but they were ahead of that chapter.
Yeah. So echoing the comment of the first question, that it's so nice to see this research that also has implications for coastal management and attempts to like work with the coastal management agencies. And I was wondering, what is the current status of the diversions? I haven't been able, yeah, maybe that's like asking someone how their thesis is going. Sorry. It's hard to follow it in the news.
Yes, it is. I think it's on hold for now, but they went through the process of getting an environmental impact statement. And so it's hard to imagine that it wouldn't eventually be constructed. But under the political climate right now, it seems like it's on hold.
I
Do
can
you
just
have-
add
okay,
one
great.
other thing. I'm in a project, the NOAA funding is to establish a lower trophic level impact study. So there were different phases, and we are in phase 2 this is for Barataria Bay, to look at all the lower trophic impact, not from the diversion per se, but just kind of monitoring this current state and come up with some, I guess, assumptions what might be when the diversions is open. So there's a lot of studies going on to define the baseline before that comes into effect.
Yeah, and there was some discussion about potentially modifying the plans for the diversion a little bit. Maybe a smaller scale version.
The ground was broken already on the Myrtle Grove diversion, right? The mid-Barataria.
The ground was broken, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
Then, yeah, it's not open.
okay,
Right, yeah.
thanks.
I had a question for Alex, actually. You mentioned that you were trying to calculate, I think, above ground biomass of mangroves using average data.
It's actually not mangroves. It's mostly marshes, and the delta is also freshwater. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to try and upscale it using Sentinel data. I'm wondering, is that also to try and calculate biomass? And is that just to expand the temporal range, or how do you see that
More
working?
to expand the spatial range. So Avarice only flew over a portion,
Gotcha.
like Atchafalaya and Terrebonne Basin. And we'd like to extend it to further across the coast, yeah, but spatially, not temporally.
Okay, gotcha. Because I'm wondering like how that would be done, going from like hyperspectral data to just multispectral data.
Yeah, so that's why it's not done yet, is it doesn't work as well, but yes.
Yeah, that's a really cool plan. Yeah.
I mean, there are definitely people who have tried or published above ground biomass maps using satellite data. So it would be similar to that, just informed by Avarice. So hopefully,
yeah,
better.
Thank you.